Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. This is our second webinar around gender and power, and I'll just leave it. So you've got Manita here from YGAP and Audrey as well.
Hi, everyone. So as Manita mentioned, this is our second webinar. In the last webinar, we looked at how to apply gender lens to your program, and this week it's all going to be about your organization. So hope you are as excited as we are to get started. Just some housekeeping, which we go through every week. So just remember to put yourself on mute when you are not speaking. Here, and we got your message. We know you'll be on mute throughout the whole call, but we appreciate you joining us regardless. You can select the gallery view at the top right-hand corner to see everyone's faces. Again, we'd love it if you could, put your camera on, but if you're uncomfortable with doing that, that's completely okay as well. We'd love it if you're contributing. Good, switch your camera on at that point. Feel free to ask questions and interrupt anytime that you feel like you want to. But also you can use the chat function to type any questions that you might have throughout the call. And also please note that this is a webinar, so it is being recorded. Our next call, which will be the seminar, which will be a lot more interactive, that one won't be recorded. So just be aware that it is recorded. Again, we ask you to share as freely as you can. And then if there's anything that you do want to remove from the recording, you can always let us know. So we're going to get started. So the focus for today, as I mentioned, is really on the organization, building on from the programmatic subject that we actually talked about last time. So the objective for this week is to increase access to your organizations for all genders or for a particular gender if that's your objective. So the outcome for today is really to look at how you can apply a gender lens to different parts of your organization and what are some of the key strategies that you can implement for all of those parts. And we'll mention a few of them, and I think I shared them with you on those emails, but feel free to jump in if there's any other parts of your organization that you think is very important to consider, and we can have a chat about that as well. So the agenda, very similar to last week's. We just want to keep that consistent theme going. So we have the introduction, then we will look at how you can identify issues and create strategies. So that was the process that we took you through last week that underpins all of the other strategies that are developed that we're going to share with you today. And then we're going to look at what are the key elements that define an organization. Again, this won't be the full laundry list. There'll be 3 key ones, but if you do want to add more, we're more than happy to add them in and chat about them as well. And what are some strategies that can be implemented to consider gender within those different areas of your organization. And we'll have a group discussion, which is just around what you are hoping to achieve within your organization when it comes to considering gender or increasing gender equality or diversity. And then we'll just close and discuss what the next steps are. As I mentioned, it's really exciting. The next time we're going to meet is going to be over a seminar format, which will be a lot more interactive. And we can't wait to hear everything you have to say about both program and organization, what we've spoken to you about so far.
Great. So as an introduction, again, covering what we did last time, and just before we go into it, just wanted to let you know, and some of you will know this, that the previous recordings of the webinars and I think the slide decks as well are now available. So you can go back and access what we are saying. So you don't need to take significant notes or anything like that. You will be able to access the slides and the recordings. And there's always a little bit of a delay from when we do it to when it's uploaded, just touching on what Audrey said. So in case things are said and you want us to take them out, it gives us that time to take that out. So don't worry about not speaking freely. So the objective, so when we're looking at your organization, we need to look at the nuances around applying a gender lens, just like we looked at these same nuances in program. When you say gender lens, you can be talking about a quota. So for example, from your perspective, do you want 50% of women in your team or your executive as your quota, as your target? Or are you going to have a gender mandate? For example, are you just going to have a mandate saying you're going to ensure that there's women on your team? Or is this going to be a consideration? So we will consider the gender of our team or none. And the reason we're repeating these for is this is actually real, and this will be really dependent on your organization and your approach. And this will help you also articulate why you're doing it and why you might have a quota as opposed to a mandate, as opposed to a consideration. And again, to reiterate, the objective of today is how are we as intermediaries going to increase access to our organization for all genders. Again, for this webinar, we will be considering gender in the binary sense, but also want to reiterate that it isn't binary, and we recognize that there are multiple genders and people who might not identify as a gender. Just recognizing that, acknowledging that as a group that we have here. If you do have any issues around that, please do let us know. For the purposes of this webinar, we will mostly be referring to men and women. And also what's really important to consider in all the work that we do within this webinar, within your organization, across the breadth of the work, is intersectionality. And again, what we mean by that is when we consider notions of race, religion, sexuality, sexual orientation, culture, all those and much more compound any negative power dynamics in relation to gender. And that's something to really consider when we talk about a gender lens. Did someone, Ragini, did you want to say something? You've just gone off mute, and you're more than welcome to, by the way.
Oh no, I think that was accidentally. I'm sorry.
No problem. If anyone does want to speak, do exactly that intentionally. Go off mute, and then and we'll throw the microphone to you. Very much welcome this. And again, as much as possible, we would love to hear your stories and your ideas as we run this webinar. Of course, the seminar will be different, where it will be quite interactive. But please don't think this is just us contributing. We'd love to hear. So you're more than welcome to turn your microphone off or add comments. Audrey's on the comments so she can see exactly what's coming up, and we can talk about it in real time. So a quick one on how we're going to, what our process was in developing this structure. We started by identifying the issues. So the first one is really understanding what your objective is around gender within your organization. Welcome, Shabir. So Shabir just joined us. If you would like to speak, Shabir, you're more than welcome. Otherwise, we just request that anyone who's not speaking put their microphone on mute. The second stage is identifying the problems. You know, what are problems around gender, and why isn't your high-level objective being met? And we'll take you through some questions that we consider are important around organization, and you might have some questions as well. And then pick an element, you know, pick what component within your organization, program, ecosystem you want to work on. And then it's really about looking at this through a lens. And this is physically what we mean. Pick an aspect, know that there's issues, and go, what does it look like if I am a man? What does it look like if I am a woman? What does this look like if I am transgender, for example? And really deep dive into what certain components will look like through a different lens. So literally applying a gender lens. So again, just a request, if you are on the call and you're not speaking, we could please request you put yourself on mute. That would be really good. Shabir, I think you're the only one who's not on mute. Okay, let's get, identifying the strategies. So after we realize what the issues are, the next step is really looking at the strategies. Again, we start with the objective. Do a quick test with your target. If you are trying to get more women into your organization, do a quick test if your strategy resonates with the women in your organization at the moment. Do really lean testing before you go out and commit a huge resource, either a human resource or money towards it. When we are looking at strategies, we always think about what's easy versus what's complex. And something that's easy will often require low resource and low time. And we kind of quantify that as, you know, it takes around a week or so to implement, and 1 week or 3 months to implement. And then complex is something that would require a bit more money, a bit more time, and maybe a dedicated resource. So between 6 to 12 months. Again, this really depends on your organization, how you do your budgets and within your context. And again, coming back to that principle that one size doesn't fit all when you're looking at a strategy. So what would be really easy for us to do might not be that easy for one of you guys to do because of the context you're in. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just depends on your context. Any questions? We went through that quite quickly because that was a recap on the process, and now we're going to get into it. So when we consider the key elements of an organization, we are considering the board, who sit often above your organization. And what is the composition? What are the issues relating to the composition of the board and the processes of a board? And we'll go a bit deeper into those. Just
acknowledging that if you don't have, you can have a formal board and you can have a more informal board. It can be an advisory board, or if you don't have any kind of structure, you could have, maybe think about it as the mentors or the advisors you tap into to get advice on how you run your organization. And some of the strategies that we'll share will be very relevant to those people as well.
Absolutely. So the first is the board, the second is your team, the actual people who do the job. And then within the team, we're going to look at composition of the team and recruitment of a team. And then we go really deep inside and the culture of your organization, looking at values, policies, and what it is like in practice. And then anything else that you might consider important, please do make a note of it, and we'll make time to at least have a look at it within this webinar and maybe flesh it out outside this webinar. So we are going to, again, zip through this quite quickly. We are hoping that today we shouldn't take more than an hour. We know everyone's really busy, but we do want to go through a fair bit of detail. So we'll start with the board. So what are the current, actually, we'll start with this one. This was the question that we sent to you on Slack and on email. And just curious if anyone would like to share if there's any issues that you're currently facing within your organization around gender, or when we're considering gender. Would anyone like to share that at this stage? No. No problem. And we will come back to that at the end after we've covered a few of these topics as well. I'm really surprised because we face a lot of issues, which is why we've got such a strong focus on this. But a lot of the examples we'll be giving are from within YGAP and within the organizations that we partner with and work with as well. So if these resonate with you, do let us know and we can keep going. So the board. Again, going back to what Audrey said, that a lot of you may not have a governing board. You are very likely to have a board as your organization grows and develops. But yes, it does depend on your context. Let's, for this webinar, use the board in the sense as who is governing your organization, right? So it might be a formal board that YGAP has that we all report into. It could be advisory members who support you as the CEO or support the CEO if they're not on this call. It could be, in this context, if you don't have a board and you don't have advisors, it could just be your executive level, right? All the principles are fairly translatable, but the concepts are really important to consider because it looks at the decision-making power within your organization and why it's important to consider. So the two elements we're looking at is board composition and board processes. So when we're looking at board composition, it's really important to consider the diversity of who is making the decisions in your organization, who is right at the top and making these decisions. And it's really important to understand that a diverse board or diverse group of decision makers is very important when you're in an environment that we are working in social entrepreneurship, with things constantly changing, with policies constantly changing. Having a diverse board means you're actually able to make decisions within that changing environment. So a couple of questions you can ask around your board composition is, how do you attract and create a gender diverse board? consisting of people who've got the right profile, the skills, experience, and background, not only to support your current organization and what your mission and vision is for your current organization, but who are the board members who are going to help you land your strategy, you know, where you want to be. And this is a real-time issue we're facing here at YGAP. We've had a brilliant board for about 10 years with some tweaks and changes. We are looking to, our strategy for growth and diversification is quite different to what we were 10 years ago. So right now, I'm in the process of working with my board chairman to say, how can we structure our board? How can we make sure the composition is right to actually deliver on the strategy that we have planned for the next 3 to 10 years? So it's a very different board now than what we had before, or it is about to be, for all the right reasons. So some of the strategies you can look at to implement and to change board composition is to have a really strong gender diversity policy. And this should start at your board charter level. So a board charter in very plain English is basically the rules of what the board operate under. If you don't have a board, this might be your general policies. It might also be your constitution or whatever it's called within your organization. And within that, you can have a really explicit statement saying that, and I'll give you YGAP's example, and I'll use YGAP as the organization we're talking about. We're going to say YGAP has a very deliberate approach to ensuring that we consider gender in all our operations. As board members, we encourage every board member to have a strong focus of gender in every decision-making process. A statement like that within the rules of your organization, within the terms of reference that every board member signs, within a contract when someone comes on board, makes it really, really clear that someone who's joining the board or joining your organization knows where you stand as an organization and also what they are signing up to. And don't underestimate how powerful this can be. Again, going back a couple of weeks when we were talking about having this in your recruitment documents for team members and entrepreneurs, this gives a really good signal to people looking at your organization, and it's going to attract the right kind of person to join your board. So the second thing we touched on a little bit is the position description and selection criteria. And this looks at exact board members that you need. We are doing this right now, and I'm going to interchange this with board matrix, which is the third one to consider. So this is looking at the kind of board or the kind of people you need around you to deliver on the work that you really want to do. And you can do two things. You can look at the current gaps in your board by doing a board matrix, by looking at each individual and ranking in order what skills the current board has. So for example, who's got legal experience? Who's got financial experience? Who's got organizational change experience? That will show where your gaps are in the board and help you bring in people to strengthen those gaps. What we can do to ensure that gender diversity is looked at is have within your matrix, within your position description, within your selection criteria, a statement or a criteria that actually says understanding of gender or understanding of how to increase diversity within an organization. When we did this within our board, there was only one person who ranked 3 out of 5, and that was me. So within our board. So again, we realized this is something that's important. At the moment, there's only one board member that can actually make decisions around this. What are we going to do to change this? So this is a real life example again, and something that real practical framework they can use to do this. And the last one is quotas. And quotas, I'm sure everyone has heard about before. It's basically saying something like, we want 50% of our board to be female, or we want 50% of our board to be male if you have an all-female board. Be really careful with quotas. My wonderful chairman at the moment has recognized that we don't have enough women on our board. And he said, let's just fill the board with women. I'm like, no, actually what's really important is to, again, look at your overarching strategy of your organization, where you actually want to land as an organization, and then build your board to fill the gaps and also help you land where you want to go. If as an organization you have a very strong gender lens and you have a very deliberate intention to make sure gender is applied across your organization and your program, by virtue, the people you're going to attract into your board will fill that mandate. I hope that gives you some clarity around how you can improve the gender diversity on your board. So the second one is board processes. So you might have an amazing board or you're about to get a really diverse board. If the processes under which your board operate aren't inclusive, you are, again, by virtue, either not going to attract the right board members or they're not going to stay. So it's really important to ask a few questions around this, which is, how do you ensure the processes your board follows don't privilege one gender over another? What does this actually mean, right? And how do you ensure that power is balanced during board meetings? That's one thing to consider. And that all the voices are heard. And when you say something like board processes, everyone will go, oh no, that's fine. We've got experts around the table. We'll make sure this is all right. What tends to happen is, because you tend to have very strong advisors and experts in the field, because one person is appointed the chairperson of your board, there are plenty of power dynamics within the actual board and also how the board will then function. And it's a tricky one within the organization. You're actually going to work bottom up in this section. But as we go through this, you can see the little things that you can change to ensure that the board processes make sure that you actually have a gender diverse board and you retain a gender diverse board. So a couple of things to consider: timing and location. So often, I'm not sure how you guys do board meetings. This can be as your executive team meetings as well, but really consider when you are having these meetings. If your meetings are always in the evenings, are you automatically privileging people who might not have to go home to young children or the elderly that they look at? Are you automatically privileging people who feel safe traveling at night? Same thing with early morning meetings. Whereas if the meetings are structured during the day or they rotate in timing, that might be more inclusive in bringing different genders and attracting different gender groups to your meetings, because we know that in general, especially in emerging markets and the markets that we all work in, predominantly responsibility for primary care for children and elderly do fall on women. And I grapple with this all the time as to how much time I'm spending away from my family to do meetings in the evenings. And so location is another consideration. Can you actually do your meetings virtually like we do here? That is something that we need to consider, not only for gendered groups, but also to include diversity. So if you would like to have someone on your board that is in another country, how can you be inclusive about that? If they are the perfect gender expert that you want on your board, consider the actual physical location and logistics around your board. Sometimes having board meetings on weekends works as well. And again, it depends on your organization and the culture within you guys are operating. The second one is a code of conduct, and this is in relation to the board charter as well, but it basically articulates your board's values and accountabilities of all the directors. And within this code of conduct, if you are really clear about your approach to gender, and again, everyone signs up to this, then you can make sure that everyone who's there is doing what the intended outcome is supposed to achieve. And if they're not, you have a document and say, you guys signed this, you know, you're not aligning with this. The third one is a rotating board chair. I think this is so important, but I also acknowledge this is really hard to do. The board chair often, and in my case, I have a wonderful relationship with my board chairperson, and we have a very open and honest discussion. But often what happens is the CEO reports into the chair, or it reports into the board through the chairperson. And there's a lot of power that the chairperson holds. And often what they say goes, right? and it's very difficult to fire a chairperson. It's very difficult to fire a board member if the chairperson doesn't agree, and all these sort of politics and nuances within a board. A really great strategy if you can implement it. This is great if you're thinking about creating a board, if you don't already have one, or you're about to transition your board. Think about having a rotating board chair. Why not? You've got experts around the table. Most people would have board experience. Most people will want you to succeed. So give that option to a different person within your board each quarter. You know, that might be really, really powerful to change power dynamics and to get people to leverage their different skill sets. And this also will mean that in general, board chairpersons are usually men, even in our context here in Australia. It also gives opportunities for maybe more junior people on your board to try out being a chairperson, right? And then the meeting agenda, really being very deliberate about how a meeting is conducted in the board setting. In general, administrative duties, no matter how many senior people there are in a room, will always fall on the woman, right? And please correct me if I'm wrong within your context, but we are very deliberate about this. So what I did in the last meeting, we actually finished 5 minutes earlier. I stayed seated and I worked with one other board member, and I said, I would love if everyone could help clean up all the plates and glasses because we always have dinner. And I made sure that it was everyone helping, not just the women. Mind you, there was only 2 women in our board at the moment. Be really deliberate in your agenda, inviting everyone to speak within the board meeting. Encourage the board chair to bring all the voices, because remember, you can have a diverse board, but it won't be inclusive until everyone's voices are heard. Encourage open communication and put that right at the top of every meeting, saying we want every single person to be heard. Great. So the next one we're going into is the team. And the 2 elements we're looking at is team composition and team recruitment. And the first one to consider is team composition. Now, we all know, or we're hearing a lot about how team composition, diversity in team composition is really important. Diverse thought leads to better outcomes, both for your operations as well as for strategy. So a few questions to ask when you're looking at your team composition, when you're applying a gender lens is, what is the gender makeup of our current team? How is the power distributed between the different genders within our team? When we're looking at that, have a look at who is making the key decisions in your team. You might be an amazing organization and have 50% women and 50% men, right? When you look at who's making the decisions, you might see that that's when there's an imbalance. And really, if there's a gender imbalance in decision making, that's going to infiltrate through the whole organization. Also look at decision makers and who's in leadership positions, and also who is part-time and full-time, and is this having an impact on decision making and operations within your organization. So a few strategies we can use to ensure that you have a gender diverse team is, again, we'll go back to a gender diversity policy. And this is having a policy within your suite of policies that literally talks about and states that you have a very deliberate approach on considering gender across your organization, and in particular in how your team is structured. This can either be a statement or you can have a separate policy altogether. And again, we won't touch on this again, but again, position descriptions and selection criteria are really important. Position descriptions we've talked about before. When you go out to market, make sure that your approach to having gender diversity and gender inclusion is stated really clearly on all your collateral, on your websites, on application forms, hard copy, web versions. So it's really obvious where you stand as an organization. You're attracting the right people as well. Selection criteria is another one. We talked a little bit about this before. In general, we find when excessive or more selection criteria, you will have men apply and not women. So really look at that for each role. But again, don't change things if it's going to hamper the quality of the candidate. just be aware of it, and you can segment the selection criteria. So if you have 15 criteria and you know you kind of only really want 5, you can split them up into essential, desirable, nice to have, okay? Use the language that works within your context as well. And again, you can then look at quotas. Like if you have a team that is predominantly male or predominantly female, and you really want to ensure diversity, you can start with a quota. And what that quota does is it signals to your organization and it signals to the public that you are being very deliberate about it. It might make your work much harder because the first round of applicants you get in for new recruits, for example, they may all be men, for example, and you really want to increase the number of women. What do? Well, within your organization, you can say, well, we're either going to settle for this or we are going to be very deliberate about this, and then change how we're actually recruiting, you know, and have a more deliberate approach in the channels you're looking at to make sure that quota is met. Again, understand, I think we all understand that you can't only have a quota, you need a quota as well as change processes to make sure you meet that quota. One thing we've started to do, and a lot of you might have or might be doing as well, is including gender makeup in reporting. So every time I report into the team and into the board, because we are a growing organization across the countries that we work in, I will always look at the gender makeup in our teams. So we'll look at this within our entrepreneurs in our programs. We also look at this within our teams. So we look at how many men and women and other genders are within our team, who is in leadership positions, who are in full-time positions. Always reporting against this not only shows you as someone who is being very deliberate about this, it's signaling to everyone who is within the organization that this is something really important to consider. It will also highlight very quickly when something isn't the way you want it to be, before it's too late, right? So if you're constantly reporting on this, you're about to start a new recruitment drive and you're looking for 7 new candidates for some particular part of the organization, you can make sure that at the outset, you know what objective you're trying to meet because you've been constantly reporting on it. Handing it over to Audrey.
Amazing. So now we're going to look at team recruitment, which is really how you source and select new team members. And the big thing to look out for here is unconscious bias. So unconscious bias is still present in a lot of recruitment processes. And so it's really important to have a look at those and try to see how you can minimize those bias, because bias can lead to judgment that actually leads to poor decision making. So if you want to really benefit from having a diverse team, you want to try to address as much as you can and the unconscious biases that might occur throughout your whole recruitment process. So the outcomes that we want really in this team recruitment is to have an unbiased recruitment process that allows for equal opportunity for all genders to be able to apply and be recruited as part of your organization. And some of the questions that we can ask ourselves are, how can we avoid or at least minimize bias when recruiting new team members, and how are we currently advertising, interviewing, selecting candidates for the roles that we have open? So the strategies that we can look at to try to minimize bias in our recruitment process. So one of it is to try to train staff who are involved in recruitment. So you want the staff that are involved in sourcing, but also interviewing and selecting the candidates to understand diversity and understand what diversity means within your organization. You want them to be able to, as much as is possible, recognize when there is unconscious bias. You want them to, if they are writing job descriptions, for example, know how to, some tips around writing an inclusive job description. And then potentially just overall how to run and how to be conscious of and be deliberate in running an inclusive recruitment process. The second one is position descriptions, and we've talked about this a few times throughout, so I'm not going to repeat everything that's been said, but other things that you can consider when it comes to position descriptions is the language. So the wording, there are gender charged words, so words that are associated in your environment, in your culture, in your region with specific gender traits or gender characteristics. So the thing to do here is to just try to take a step back and look at your environment and think about what words or language might be associated with one gender more than another, that might appeal to one gender more than another, and try to make sure that as much as you can, your job descriptions do not privilege or favor a certain gender over another. For example, if you use words like, I know in Australia, if you use competitive, that's definitely more of a male trait. If you use collaborative, you'll potentially attract more female candidates. So it's just being very conscious and aware of those, and try to, as much as you can, find gender neutral terms to use throughout your job descriptions. Of course, if you're trying to recruit a certain gender, potentially that could also help you in that. There are tools out there that help you analyze your job descriptions, but really I think the best way to do it is to go out there, try to understand what attracts and appeals to different genders, and try to make sure that your job description speaks equally to all genders. And then also, once you've had a go at reviewing your job descriptions, go and test it with a diverse pool of candidates. Test it, get their feedback, and see what works and what doesn't. Because again, there's no one size fits all, and the softwares and tools can help. But I think you're really better off to just kind of go into your own environment and figure out what works best for you and the candidates that you're going after. I think that Minita mentions in terms of the number of requirements and the types of requirements that you put in your position descriptions. It's very common in Australia here, if you have a very long list of requirements, that women are less likely to apply, just because we want to meet 100% of them, and I'm guilty of that. So it can make it a little bit intimidating, and we might think we're not suited for the role that's available. So in that case, it's good to agree very early on with your team what are the key 4 or 5, whatever number suits you, requirements that are absolute must-haves, and then what are nice to haves, and do you need to include those or not, or will that actually mean that it appeals less to certain genders. And then Manita has mentioned this already, express your commitment to diversity and inclusion within the job description, whether it's specific policies that you could have around, and again, it's all about equality. So it might not be maternity leave, it might just be primary caregiver leave, because that can be a female or a male. And what other events or activities do you run that might attract, I guess, all gender groups, but show that you are really committed to increasing the gender diversity and equality within your team. And again, if you have values at the organization level which are really supportive of diversity and inclusion, to just have them on your job descriptions as well. So the third strategy is around diversifying your talent pipeline. So really what that's about is, when you're going to recruit someone, you're going to have a look at your team composition, and Minita just went through this. You want to have a look at the gender makeup, but also the gender makeup and the different levels of seniority. So a lot of organizations we've seen in not-for-profit space have a lot of women, attract a lot of women, but they tend to not still be the decision makers. So what is the makeup of your team, and according to the genders, how many are in those leadership positions versus more junior positions? So once you've done that exercise, then you want to understand, for the role that you're recruiting for, or all roles really, where are your candidates seeing your roles being advertised? How are they hearing about these opportunities? So it could be online, it could be through their local coffee shop, wherever you advertise. Essentially, a way you can capture this, if you have paper or online applications, is to just have that question in your application form, which is, where did you hear about this job opportunity, to try to track where they are hearing about you. And then if you feel that your talent pipeline at the moment has, 80% females and 20% male, and you want to correct that, then it's about being deliberate and going to establish partnerships, or just finding new channels that may give you access to other gender groups that are currently underrepresented within your organization. And then you can also conduct blind selections. So that can be challenging once you get to the interview stage, but prior to that, really, it's about removing all kind of data that would allow you to identify the specific gender of the applicant, and that aims to reduce as much as it can bias around specific gender traits that might be suited or less suited for a specific role. And then the other part of that is to set really clear selection criteria and clear metrics for selecting candidates. So just agreeing on those before, so that then when you are going through the selection process, your biases can act a little bit less, just because you have very clear criteria that's objective that you need to fulfill. So one of the things around that is a lot of people look at past experience. You could have your criteria looking at how can you actually capture the potential of someone as well. So if they have a little bit less past experience, how could you put a metric or a criteria around the potential for growth? And again, also looking at a lot of people look for cultural fit, which is great, but sometimes that means that you just have a whole bunch of people that look alike and think alike. So what we like to say is cultural add, which is looking at how a person might add to your culture and your organization with their diversity versus just fit into what's existing, what's there. Yeah, that's brilliant.
Right. So there's lots of things we can do, and I think we touched on it in the last one as well. You know, there's some really fancy software out there that you can actually use in recruitment to remove bias as well. We're not at that stage yet, but I know we are linked with other partners who have done that. So that's an option as well. If you are ready to do that, and if you're really deliberate about that, you can do that. So the next one we're looking at is culture. So leading on from what Audrey was saying, it's such an important aspect to look at within an organization. And in my opinion, one of the trickiest ones, right? Because we have this saying, and I'm not sure if you guys have heard about this, but we have a saying that someone told me ages ago, but culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And culture will always win. And the reason for that is you can have an amazing strategy in place. If you don't have a really good culture associated with it, nothing will happen. This is also very, very specific to your context. And I wanted to acknowledge that at the outset. Like, we will speak a lot about what it is like within YGAP, and also based on about 45 or 50 organizations we're still currently working with at the moment to look at all these best practices around culture, around gender lens in all aspects. So in general, within culture, what are the things we need to consider? So at the high level, culture is really how they're the unsaid rules around how your organization operates, right? So they're the things that you know. So for example, it's not written anywhere, but within the YGAT culture, we say that you don't have to wear suits and high heels to work, but we also know that when we're in front of a client, we dress appropriately. It can get really hot here, and so we say, sure, you can wear shorts and singlets any day you want, except when you're in front of a client, dress appropriately. They're the things about culture that are sort of, some people might have it written down, we don't, but it's really important to consider. So they underpin your organization, and they also inform a lot of the policies and how you operate in all aspects of your organization. So you might recognize that, gender diversity is really important, but how are you going to embed it within the culture? So the three elements we'd like to discuss with you today are values and policies. What does culture look like in practice? And the benefits of having a gender committee. So when we look at values and policies, this sort of underpins everything you do, right? Culture will make sure that anything you put in place will come out. And some of the questions you want to ask is, does your organization currently have policies that are committed to gender? We've talked about policies and making explicit statements in nearly every, this is the third time we're speaking with all of you, but we've talked about this a lot. But if it's not written down somewhere, if it's not articulated by people in your team, then how do people know what it is that you're standing for and what it is that you're believing in? So if you are committed to it, is there a value associated with that? Do you have a policy associated with that? So some of the strategies to consider is to actually have a value around gender. YGAP has 5 values at the moment, and there isn't one explicitly around gender, and that's something we actually need to discuss, and it's something that we grew within our organization, so it's something we need to bring together as an organization. And that can be something very similar to what's in your position description, but it's written and everyone knows that this is a value of your organization. The second one we've talked about within the program and within some of the other slides today is publicize your values on all your marketing collateral. This will really show your commitment as an organization, not just internally, but externally. And why is that important? Well, you are showing that this is what you stand for, but again, you're also attracting partners, stakeholders, entrepreneurs, anyone who wants to be part of you. They're coming in for the right reasons because they see your values and they want to be part of that. And consider it across all your channels. And you can be strategic about that. It's not something you need to send out every single time and once a week or anything on social media, but just make sure it's very visible to the people who you want to notice. Again, we go back to a gender diversity policy, and this can be purely gender diversity or inclusion, whatever the terminology that is relevant to you, that is important. Make sure you have a policy around that. And one thing we always do, and I think it will be relevant for everyone, is be dynamic about these policies. As you learn more, as things change within your ecosystem, as you develop different partnerships, as you develop more expertise in different areas, these policies can and should change, right? Your policies are as strong as yourself as an organization. Don't let them hold you back. Let them help you thrive. And then the last one is to just make sure that you can't just have one policy, especially around gender. And those of you who are there in Singapore heard me say this all the time. You need to integrate your gender approach and your policies through everything within your organization. So an example of this is you might have a straight one policy related to gender diversity, but make sure it is then included into your recruitment policy, into the leave policy, into the policy around harassment and bullying, in how people are going to raise grievances with you. Everything needs to be considered. So this isn't something easy to do, but again, it's a step-by-step approach that you can do to make sure that everyone, whenever they look at everything, it's all embedded. Great.
Amazing. I'm going to just go a little bit closer. Please let me know again. I think, Regina, you mentioned thank you that I was cutting in and out a little bit in the last segment. Hopefully you can hear me clearly now. If you can't, please go off mute and just shout at me. I will try to be in a better position. So culture and practice, as Manita mentioned, culture is really the way things are done in and around your organization, and it is based on shared beliefs, assumptions, attitudes, and customs that live within your organization and kind of shape the environment and the place that it is to work at. So it's really important to consider a gender lens within your culture, because really, if your culture does not embrace gender diversity and inclusivity, then any strategies that you put in place in relation to trying to increase your diversity or your inclusion won't be effective, because it won't be supported by everyone that makes up your organization and by the environment. And it'll make it also very hard for you, even if you recruit the best talent, diverse talent, to retain them if they don't feel accepted or heard, or they can't express themselves within the culture within your organization. So this is a really, really strong and important piece of the puzzle. So some of the questions we can ask ourselves are, what are some of the deep-seated beliefs relating to gender that drive negative behavior within your organization, if there are any? And what can make your organization culture more inclusive for different gender groups? What could be done? So some of the strategies that you can consider, one is to do induction and regular staff training. So really, training is a way to raise awareness, it is a way to address different biases, and it is also a way to develop a common language for everyone to be able to address the issues relating to gender within your organization, which is really important. And so the first thing when you're developing training to do is to really understand what diversity and inclusion means to people within your organization, because it means different things for different generations. It probably means different things for people of different gender groups that identify with different gender groups. So it's really important for the training to be effective that you kind of understand the beliefs and the definitions, how the people that you're addressing the training to actually define the key concepts that you're addressing within the training. So the training can include anything to do with just, again, being aware of the biases and what to do to try to minimize the biases that you might have in your everyday work, what kind of language can be used, how to foster a safe environment for where everyone feels like they can contribute and their voices are being heard. Again, things like your meetings, like when is it appropriate to schedule meetings, so that when someone is actually scheduling a meeting, they take into account the fact that whoever they're inviting to that meeting, take into account their needs and their preferences so that everyone can be included and actually participate and be as productive as they can be within your organization. And the second thing is to just consider all things that could make your culture more inclusive. And this really goes back to understanding who is in your organization and really analyzing it and understanding their beliefs, assumptions, values, what is driving negative behavior, if there is any, and really get to the bottom of that so that then you can define strategies that allow you to address those. So some things, again, could be around timing and location. It could just be around timing your meetings in the afternoons, or we do our group activities at YGAP in the afternoon as well, and not outside of work hours, because a lot of us can't actually make after our events. And those events that are social events, even if they seem like they're kind of separate from work, they are a big part of how you bond as an organization and how you feel included. So if they're outside hours and people can't attend, then that is actually not inclusive. So you can just put in place different strategies that will allow you for every voice to be heard. So that can be something like in your team meeting, potentially getting permission from those that speak up a little bit less, whether you're allowed to call them out and call out when they're not talking, so that they can contribute in a safe environment, and whether they'd be happy to do that. So again, it's just really about understanding your context and your environment and what would work best for you. Obviously, in terms of making your culture more inclusive, you really want your leadership team to be on board as well. So that's a massive thing that needs to be taken into account as well. And then again, it could be anything from providing safe opportunities to share and discuss as well. And we'll talk a little bit about the gender committee in a second. But I've seen some organizations that have forums that are separate, where people from different gender backgrounds can actually express their concerns, their beliefs, their priorities, their identities, and it allows everyone to learn from that practice and to feel a little bit, more included as part of the larger organization. This is a very kind of limited list, and there's a lot of different things you can do. But again, the starting point is to really understand what's going on within your organization and go more specifically to the negative behaviors and where they're sourced from, and then trying to address those.
Thanks, Audrey. So we're nearly there. The last one we'd like to talk to you about is the gender committee. And before we get to a gender committee, and it's leading into that, is, not all of us will have the capacity to create a committee around this. So one of the really quick things we can do and to ensure there's a culture around addressing gender within your current team and the way that is run at the moment is have allies and have people who are not you also talking about the issues that you already know are really critical. So everyone on this call, all of us realize the power of having a gender lens across our work, right? All of us will be on that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be on this call. But if you are constantly the one who's championing these and no one else is, you're not going to get very far, right? So one of the things I do is, I have Audrey now, which is wonderful, and we constantly talk about this, but it doesn't stop with just us two. There's different members in our team, both junior and more senior, who talk about this now. We have a team dedicated to work on this, and I'm not saying that you don't have that, but also make sure that there are other people that you can call on. A classic example within our team is the one person who I love, who's talking about this, who you wouldn't think is one of our youngest members in our team, who is a guy. And he actually put his hand up when we were doing this a few months ago and says, I'd like to work on this, Manita. I know this isn't in my remit, but I really believe in it. And I'm like, that's fantastic. to have one of my junior team members who's very entrepreneurial. He's the face of our organization, who's committed to gender. That's great. It makes my work easier, but it also brings out his perspective on a lot of things. So if you can find your gender champions within your organization, that's brilliant. And that's something you can start doing straight away and seeing who's interested in them. And a great thing to have, if you can, and it takes a little while to set up, we're still looking at setting ours up, is a committee, a gender committee. And this is a committee made up of diverse individuals. This can be both within your organization or your partners or your stakeholders that are very committed to the concept of gender and gender diversity within your organization and your work, and will help you drive it. They'll not only bring expertise and knowledge and ideas, but they will really help you drive the change within the work you're doing. And the reason something like this is really important is otherwise, as all of us know, and a few of us talked about this in Singapore, these are all ideas that bubble around in our heads and we know is important, but it stays at that superficial level. And we know that unless it's really implemented and driven and weaved through every aspect of our organization and our work, we're not really going to see the true positive impact that we know it can have. So, the ideal situation is to make sure that all the issues around gender and all the strategies that we talk about are actually identified, are created, and then implemented. And a gender committee can be responsible for that. And they can also highlight, our issues around this being considered deeply. What is happening around the world? All of us here, we can be sort of the virtual gender committee for each other, where you can test different ideas. You've already got a group of people who are committed to this, and we also bring diversity in thought and as well as diversity in how we're running our organizations, and that can be really, really powerful. Some of the best insights that Audrey and I have had in this work is through speaking to other organizations like everyone on this call and other people who have shared what's working for them and what hasn't worked for them. And that's a really powerful thing to bring in. So a few strategies is to create a gender committee or a gender advisory board, and have really strong terms of references and what you expect from them from anything like this. Make it something that, yes, it's really, really important for you and your organization, but also adds value to them. Similar to how you would set up a board, but they'll have obviously different responsibilities and duties. If you have committees that currently exist, so for example, at YGAP, we have our risk committee, our internal committee, our impact committee, and our fundraising committee. And it always takes a while to create those committees. But if you have those committees already existing, make sure there's someone within those committees, and it might be the same person that goes into all of these meetings, that has a focus on gender. When you have that, that is a really strategic, smart, way to interweave gender throughout all the communications, because it matters in fundraising. It matters when you're making investments. It matters when you're looking at the risk within your organization. Someone with excellent experience in risk and law might not have that experience in gender, but the gender person who is in that committee can ask those difficult questions and help integrate the different skill sets. And then the last one, which is something we talked about in Singapore and something that YGAP has done, is get expert advisors. We worked very closely with the Criterion Institute to develop the program that we delivered in Singapore. We worked very deeply in partnership. They had all the theory behind it. They've been doing this for years. And we work in the space of social entrepreneurship. So it was a really good marriage made, where we're leveraging each other's skill sets. The best example I give is, if you're not an accountant, you tend not to, you wouldn't, if you can afford to do it, you're not going to do your own accounts when you're running, a few $1 million organization, which hopefully you guys are or you're about to be. So why would you claim to be an expert in gender if there are people out there? And speak to them, and we are networked with quite a few of them, but that's the best way to get some advice on how to deliver your gender strategy. So that's a lot of us talking. I know some of you might not be able to speak, but we'd love to hear from you if you can. So, what current issues you're facing around gender? If you've tried any strategies, how did they go? If you have any strategies from what we've just talked about, or any new ones that you're testing within the organization, we'd love to hear from you. So the first one who puts their microphone off mute gets a virtual high five. Would anyone like to share? I can see all your names, so I can actually call you out if I need to.
Shabir, thanks for, oh, Kamal.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. So thank you for sharing. Yeah, so the strategies, I think somebody mentioned in the start, I think we are right now, our team is made up of, I mean, we've got more females on our team and there are just 2 male members who are part-time. So we're not sure that what sort of, I mean, in the future, should we looking at recruiting more male members, or but one thing that we recently faced, which was an issue, I mean, we can say it was an issue or something related to it, like we hired interns, and so one of them was a male intern, and then this I mean, we were going out for lunch, and then so he basically pointed out, oh, you are all girls and you can just go, you can go and have lunch. I'm fine. So I mean, this made us think that, you know, that how we might not be having that culture, or I mean, we should have more males. So I mean, males are more comfortable in working with us. But then yeah, so this was something that really, I mean, we work, I mean, we didn't thought of, I mean, we don't have the resources right now to hire more people. I mean, we have part-time male members, we have advisors that are male members, but now we might, I mean, seriously consider to hire someone um, um, to, yeah, so yeah, that's something that, one thing that we feel that right now, I mean, we feel that we should look into. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for sharing, Komal. And that's really interesting to hear. And believe it or not, we have something similar happening at YGAP. And this is what's happening across our not-for-profit space here in Australia. By virtue of being a social organization and by being a not-for-profit organization, we attract more females than males. And you know, we've got at the moment, I think two males within our organization here, just in Melbourne HQ. Globally, it's different, and people are making comments. Oh, we're the only 2 guys in the team, and you know, is that funny or not? And like, what we do is actually, sure, we'll call it out. We say that it is what it is. But if it gets to a certain point where someone is not feeling included, I think instead of, you know, one thing you can consider, instead of going, oh, we just need more males on the team, is what would make that person feel comfortable. So yes, in every conversation, we are very deliberate about making sure that everyone contributes. The junior team members, senior team members, the males and the females. And that's one thing you can do. If this individual is saying, you know, oh, I don't want to come to lunch, say, hang on, lunch is lunch. We definitely want you to come. It absolutely doesn't matter. And being very deliberate about that. And it maybe will work, might not work the first time, maybe it might not work the second time. But if you keep saying it, that's what they'll learn.
um Yes, so so actually when he left, so he really he went. I mean, we went for for lunch again, and we took him, and then he was really comfortable, because after that we realized that maybe we weren't involving him in our conversations, and I mean, we kept throughout the internship, we kept on involving him and asking him, because he was young, he just graduated from university. So we kept on asking his opinion, that how should we make this better. I mean, we involved him in the decision making as well. So yeah, so we ended up the experience, went well
Yeah.
with that.
And even
Yeah.
personally, like with some of my friends, I will ask them straight away, I really, really value your opinion as a male. You know, I really would like your opinion in this case. And I think that's creating value and being very honest about it. And, you know, really calling it out and going, it is what it is, but there's value in that. Sure, you're the only male in our team. There's great value in that. And let's talk about that, and let's make sure that, you know, we don't all think the same and speak the same. So yeah, amazing. Would anyone else like to share? Thank you, Komal.
We've had a couple of people share over messaging. So
Sure.
thank you, Shabir and Kazi. So Kazi, you were just mentioning that you've had no issues hiring women. In your case, you have more women than men in your organization, but probably the challenge lies in attracting female entrepreneurs into your programs, which, as you mentioned, we talked about previously. And so you said that you don't have a quota, but you do have a mandate to increase your number of female incubees. So if you do want to talk about that some more, I mean, we can talk about it today, or we can talk about it on one-on-one calls, or also in the seminar. But if you did want to dive a little bit deeper, I know we talked about some of these things last session, we can definitely do that. So feel free to let us know if you do want to talk more about this right now. Otherwise, we'll follow up with you. And Shabir, you were talking about the opposite. So you have a challenge of actually recruiting female employees. So did you want to share a bit more about that, Shabir? Maybe you can't go off mute, but hopefully what we talked about in the team composition and team recruitment can support you in developing strategies around that. Now, if you did want to have a one-on-one session when we dive deeper in terms of your context, more than happy to do that, or please feel free to cut in anytime if you did want to talk about it today. Is there anyone else?
Yeah, we would love to work with you on this, Shabir, and share some. Again, what we share is very high level, and they're the ones that I guess have come out as the most important strategies across the work we're all doing across the regions. But there are so many other things that we can test with you. So Shabir, you're more than welcome to contact Audrey or myself directly, and we can work on this, and we can bring it all together during the seminar as well.
Yeah, and Kazi, I've just got your note. I'll follow up with a one-on-one with you as well.
Yeah, fantastic.
Anyone else want to share?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. Hey, this is Ragini. So one of them was around the culture piece, where we're talking about including a value around gender. Could you maybe share a few examples about what a value around gender would look like? And the second thing was when in the recruitment process, when we're looking at recruiting mentors or in our executive level, most of them come through networks of the leadership. And so even though the actual recruitment process or the way we draft the position or the job descriptions may be taking into consideration gender sensitive and making sure it's neutral. When you're hiring through informal networks, how do we ensure that we're accounting for any bias over there?
Sure, really, really tricky ones. And everyone, you know, please jump in as well, because these, Audrey and I will share our ideas around this. Values around gender should integrate with the values of your organization. So if we go up to the very first slide, which is, you know, what is your objective around gender? You start with that, right? And let me just find the slide. You know, is it a quota? Do you want more gender diversity in numbers within your organization, or do you want to make sure there are different genders within your organization, or do you just want it to be a consideration? The reason this is really important is your value will be worded and structured around that. So for example, within YGAP, we want to make sure that, like, one value around gender is that we want to make sure that our team has true diversity at all levels, right? And that includes gender, that includes experience, cultural diversity, and everything like that. And the way we talk about it is we start, again, of the position description. So we say it at the outset. We also talk about it within the team. And this goes down to during team meetings, during board meetings, we're very explicit about this, and we're very explicit on having a gender diverse team and a board. When I think I mentioned this to you before, when I was recruited for the role, I made it very clear that we need to approach gender parity at our board level. And since that day, every time my board chairman speaks in public, he makes it a point to state that this is what we are at the moment, this is what we're aspiring to be. We don't need to worry about that within our team because we do have mixed genders in the decision-making roles. We have mixed genders across different levels of the organization and broadly. At the board, we don't. So that's what we mean by a value. It's something that is aligned with the objective you're trying to achieve, but it's also spoken about by the right people continuously. I'll talk about the second one really quickly, and then I'll hand it over to Audrey if she has ideas as well. When we're looking at recruitment and informal networks, this is a tricky one because this goes into culture and how you guys do things, right? And my suggestion here would be to work with the informal networks to make sure they really understand your objectives. It's almost like, and I'm going to use the word training, but it's not like you sit down with them and you train them, but you make sure that, you know, the people you're working with, they understand your values and your objectives as an organization. So when they are sourcing people for you and speaking to them, they will know straight away, okay, this person is a right fit, this person isn't a right fit. So that would be my very diplomatic approach in how to go. And also, you know, this is what we're about to do. Go through other networks. This is exactly an issue we're facing at the moment. My board is like, oh, we'll just get other people that we know. And I'm like, hang on, why can't we advertise more broadly? Like, we are growing as an organization. We have a great reach. Let's bring in new people and go through external recruitment. It's always scary to make that change, but you can always suggest it as well. So they're the two things. Audrey?
Yeah, I agree completely. I think it's really about sharing your objectives and, again, the team composition and where you see the value in recruiting diverse new team members, and just really making that explicit. And potentially, if they're interested in understanding about unconscious biases and other things that are happening when they're recommending a new team member or a new person to join your organization, you can share that with them as well. And again, as Manita mentioned, just having a look at your talent pipeline and where you're sourcing them from. So it's informal network, and you said probably through your website and other kind of more formal means. Is there anything else you can do? Are there partnerships? How else can you get the word out to the communities or the audiences that you want to recruit from? So I think it's just thinking about it in a few different ways to just try to get to your objective, which is to hire X for your organization. So.
Did anyone else have any ideas around the two questions Ragini asked, which was around how do you create a value around gender, and how do you ensure gender diversity in recruitment when you're using informal networks? Would love to hear if anyone else has any other ideas. No. Great. Thanks for your questions. Was there any more?
There's just one from Shabir. So Shabir, you just asked that you're trying to recruit more female team members, but they tend to lose interest when you talk about going on field visits to run a project, and you're asking how can you create more interest. So that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I think you need to consider how, like, I would ask directly, like, why are field visits necessary for everyone? It can be quite inhibiting for women sometimes, in particular, depending on where you are and what's going on, you know. It's a whole, I know for us, it can be a very logistical nightmare. Like, I know when I have to go overseas, like when I was with you guys in Singapore, to plan that and to plan care for my children, to plan for who's going to make lunches and dinners, even though my husband is a very, he's a very operational father. He does shift work. So logistics is a big thing, but it's also, women in general will have different needs. And I know when I've worked in India and in Bangladesh, things as simple as public toilets are not accessible for a lot of women. And if that's an issue, that is probably a reality that we can't change. So how can you change that? How can you make it more inclusive? Are field visits necessary? What are the real issues why women don't want to come? I remember when I was working in India, and the women who we had working in the slums in India, they were afraid. We were losing some of them, and when they were speaking to the male team member, they were just saying things like, "Oh, we love working here, but we can't anymore." And when they spoke to me, they were like, actually, my family really worry about me coming home at night. So it was very different conversations depending on who was speaking to them. So we went, great, let's have a policy to pay for taxis or a car for them to go home if it's any time after 9 p.m. So we made that change, but it's the right person asking the right questions and what is actually making them not interested in the field visits. Is it logistics? Is it cultural? And then is it a requirement for the role? Audrey, did you have anything to add?
No, that's exactly what I would said as well. I'm just checking. Very welcome, Ragini. Does anyone else have any questions or things they would like to mention? No? All right. We'll just jump to the key takeaways.
Yeah, so just really quickly, we've talked about this a few times now, really consider what your gender objective is within your organization. Is it a quota? Is it the number of people you want within your team that are of different genders? Is it a mandate? Is it something you want to make sure that you consider within your organization? Or is it purely a consideration that, yes, we're going to think about this, but we might not actually have any particular numbers or qualitative measures against it? And another thing, and relating back to you, Shabir, your question, put a gender lens on and see why aren't women wanting to go on field trips, or why are they dropping off when a field trip is offered. Look at it through the eyes of different genders. And you might not always know. So test it with other women on your team and people that you trust, and say, why do you think this is happening? What's happening here in Australia might not be the same reason that it happens with you. And then look at all the strategies. Some of them are quick and easy, and some of them will take a long time to implement. But really consider them, bring your team on board, and realize that one size doesn't fit all. But everything we've suggested today and in the last couple of sessions are things that either we have done or across our work over the last 12 months, we've seen other people doing within the same context that all of us are working in social enterprise and as intermediaries and accelerators in emerging markets. So these are all real things that people are doing right now. The stage of when people are doing it, it depends on your organization. So hopefully that will inspire you to try some of these, and that they're not just pie in, or what we say, pie in the sky ideas, like an unattainable. These, hopefully we've given you some real practical ideas of what you could apply.
Great. So next steps, just as I mentioned, one-on-ones, and I'll follow up with all of you to ask whether that's something that you'd be interested in. So that would just be a one-on-one session with Manita and I think you've got 3 or 4 included as part of the Frontier Incubators program. And this is really for us to go a little bit deeper into issues that are specific to your context, to your organization, or to your program. And it'd be really great to do that ahead of the seminar, and then at the seminar you can get broader kind of feedback from the group, as well as share what you've kind of been able to trial so far. So if you're interested in that, we will share the opportunity with you by Slack and email in the next couple of days. And then next on the Gender and Power calendar, as I mentioned, we have our first seminar, which is really exciting. It's in a couple of weeks on the 17th of April, and that will be not recorded, and it will be a very interactive session where we'll get all of you to kind of brainstorm strategies. We'll get you to share what you're working on. We'll get, you know, the group to problem solve with you. So we think that you'll get a lot of value out of that particular session. So please do attend, and we look forward to really hearing about all of your progress and how you've been kind of engaging with the content that we've shared with you so far, or how you would like to engage with that content moving forward.
Yeah, and just to add with the seminar, look, it's really a learning for all of us, right? We don't want to be the ones delivering all the time. We really want to learn from you. We'll send out some guiding questions and guiding thoughts. And so you can be ready to talk about certain things. But there's a nice, small, intimate group here. So it's really about really discussing what you guys have been doing, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and just having that trust within ourselves. Again, it's not recorded. It is really learning from each other, and it will also help us learn and input into the work we're doing, and we can share all these learnings. So please don't be, we know there's a lot of this going around, but we want it to be a very candid, easy conversation. So it doesn't matter if none of us are experts in this, none of us have quite got this right yet, but this is that first step to really bring out those ideas and discuss it. That's it. Thank you. And did we finish on time? We finished with 4 minutes to spare. So big thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful week. And if you have any questions, please reach out to both of us or either of us on Slack or email. And yeah, we'll hope to see you all on the 17th of April.
Thanks, everyone.